What if I told you the rules of your game exist way beyond your character's reality? That you, as a player, have a power that your character never could. Welcome to Left for the Vultures. My name is Vase Odin, and today we will be talking about meta mechanics in role-playing games. So what do I mean by meta mechanics? They're rules that operate outside the in-game fiction but can influence gameplay, like luck points or hero points, inspiration, that kind of thing. In tabletop role-playing games, meta mechanics matter because they can influence immersion, they can influence agency, and they can influence player involvement in ways that other mechanics can't. Meta mechanics are unique in that they are a player resource instead of a character resource, and players can use them to change the course of an event or action beyond what a character's normal abilities would be able to accomplish. Today we're going to talk about meta mechanics in a bunch of different games. We're going to look at how they influence that game's immersion, how they affect the gameplay, how you get them, and some of the benefits and drawbacks of having these particular meta mechanics. I'm going to be slotting different groups of meta mechanics into their own categories. This is very loose, like don't take this as, specifically this one must belong to this group. I understand some can fit into other groups, but this is a very loose kind of categorization of the different meta mechanics just to make it a little bit easier to absorb the information that I'm going to be presenting here. So we're going to start with the classics. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, the 2014 version of Dungeons & Dragons, their meta mechanic is called inspiration. Basically how it works is your game master, if you are good at role-playing or if you immerse yourself in your character or role-play to your character's bonds or flaws or things like that and do some really interesting role-play or maybe play to the genre that you're playing, the game master has a lot of leeway as to how they're going to award your inspiration. You can only have one inspiration at a time, but you can gift it to another player if you feel that they've done a good job with their character as well and the game master has not issued them an inspiration. If you have inspiration and your game master gives you another one, you can't bank them. You can only have one at a time, so you basically lose it. Now, a lot of tables play where you can just hand it off to another player. Many people are very loose with it. The mechanic itself is it's not well defined. It's very loose. It's basically up to game master fiat. And what inspiration does is it allows you to get advantage on 1d20 roll. Now, the way advantage works in 5th edition is you have to declare that you are using the inspiration before you make the roll. So you can already see some of the drawbacks to this. For those of you who are not familiar with what advantage is in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, it's basically you roll 2 dice or 2 sets of dice and you pick the best result, whatever's going to benefit you the most. So if you're making an attack roll and you have inspiration, you can get an advantage, which means you'll roll 2d20 to attack, picking the best one of the 2 rolls, and then that will be the determining factor for whether you hit or miss. So in case you didn't catch on to the big drawback here is that there's no set rule as to how your players or your characters can earn inspiration. It's really up to the game master. And because of this, inspiration is notorious for being a mechanic that everybody forgets at the table. I mean, my groups, I've been playing for 5th edition for 10 years, and my groups, I think, maybe have used inspiration less than 20 times in the entire 10 years of playing, and that's multiple sessions a week sometimes. So I've played hundreds of games, and I've only seen inspiration used maybe 20 times over the hundreds of games. So that goes to show you just how forgotten this mechanic is, mostly because there is no defined way to use it. Also, it's a mechanic that is not super impactful. So I think this was a design choice where the designers wanted to reward players for role-playing and, getting immersed in the game, and they didn't want it to be game-breaking. So they decided to give a little bit of a sliver of a bonus to players, and that's it. Now, the other drawback with inspiration is you have to declare that you're using it before you roll. So potentially you could be wasting it on a roll that you would have rolled and succeeded at anyways. So you might have already gone to roll a critical hit, but you used inspiration and now it's wasted basically because you didn't actually need it. And There you go. So inspiration is one of those meta mechanics that I think is on the bottom of the totem pole as to how impactful it is in the game. It's nice to have it, but if it's gone from the game, nobody actually misses it. So Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition had a re-release in 2025 and that they dubbed the 2024, that they dubbed the 2024 edition of the game. And in this version, they got rid of inspiration and changed it into what they now call heroic inspiration. It is a little bit better. You can still only have one at any given moment. You can earn it the same way as regular inspiration, but also there are some character options and abilities that allow you to earn inspiration. So some character classes and subclasses allow you to give yourself or give another player character inspiration. So there are new ways to earn it, so that will keep it more top of mind, and there are more ways that you can actually use inspiration as well. You get to re-roll a die, which is a lot different than getting advantage on a roll, because you get to see the result before you decide if you want to use up your inspiration for it. That makes it a lot more useful, and it doesn't feel like you've wasted it if you were going to roll high anyways. And you can use it on any type of roll, not just a d20 roll. So you can use it for a damage roll. You can use it for a bunch of other things, like rolling your hit dice, that kind of stuff. Now, another member of the Classics group is Pathfinder. Pathfinder uses something similar to inspiration that they call hero points. Now, the way hero points work, you get 3 of them. And so you can only have a maximum of 3 at a time. And you can use them for quite a few more things. Players tend to be more aware of them, and they tend to use them more freely because you get more than one. So you're not as limited and not unsure as to when your next inspiration is going to be given to you. You already know because it's set in the rules. It's written in the rules. So players tend to be more loose with them. So how hero points work is they let you re-roll dice, just like 5th edition's inspiration mechanic. They also have the added benefit of being used to stop your character from dying. So if your character gets the dying condition, you can stabilize yourself by expending all of your hero points. The drawback to that is whether you have 1 hero point or 3 hero points, you have to use all your remaining hero points in order to stabilize. So this is a little bit tricky and plays to Pathfinder's more tactical approach to the game. So you want to have used your hero points throughout a combat that's a difficult combat and leave just 1 lingering in case something happens to your character, then you can use it and stabilize yourself and save your character from dying. So as opposed to not using your hero points, thereby not giving yourself advantage during a difficult fight, and then having to spend all 3 when you really only would have needed to spend 1. So that's pretty interesting. It adds a little bit more depth to the tactical use of these points, and I think players who play Pathfinder are very well aware of hero points. I played Pathfinder now for a couple of years, 2nd edition Pathfinder, and I find that hero points is something that players use on a regular basis. Continuing with the classics is Savage Worlds. So in Savage Worlds, you get what are called bennies. You always start with 3, but your game master can award more. So because of this, it's treated more as a resource than it is in Dungeons & Dragons. They're also more versatile. They allow you to alter your draw for initiative, because in that game, you like draw a card from a regular playing card deck. So this allows you to alter your initiative draw. You can end a condition with it. That's pretty neat. That's something that Pathfinder doesn't do, or D&D. So you can just expend a benny and now you are normalized. You can reduce damage with it, also something that's unique versus the other 2 games we've talked about. And in addition to that, you can still reroll like you can in Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons. Another classic game is Call of Cthulhu. Now in Call of Cthulhu, you have luck points. This approach is much different than inspiration, heroic, or hero points and bennies. In Call of Cthulhu, your luck is an actual stat. So just like you have your willpower points, which, is going to be, let's say, 50. You also have luck points, which are going to be like 50, 60, 70. It's a really high amount. So the way it works is Call of Cthulhu is a D100 game. So any check that you make, any attempt to do anything, you're rolling a 100-sided die. So the way the luck points work is you can just decide to succeed on a roll that you normally failed at by expending the amount of luck points needed to get you to that roll. So for example, if you need a 50 to succeed and you rolled a 36, you would need to expend 14 luck points to get you to that 50. So you can actually decide how many you're going to use. And you may not want to get a success. You may just want to go from a hard failure to a normal failure, or a regular success and push that to a hard success. So there are there are different levels of success and levels of failure in Call of Cthulhu. So this also lets you adjust that. So that's pretty interesting and gives you a lot more leeway, unlike the other 3 games we've already talked about. Also, one thing you notice is that there is no roll per se with using luck points. Now, there are luck rolls in the game, but it's a little bit different. A game master may ask you to make a luck roll to see if you found something, but this is not a meta currency. This is now using your luck stat. Luck points is something that you decide to use that is a meta currency, and that does not require any sort of roll at all. You just expend the amount of points to get you to whatever success level. So it takes away a lot more of the randomness. Now, the reason for this in Call of Cthulhu is that game is very unpredictable already. It's very deadly. So your characters are always near the brink of death if they're facing any kind of opposition or combat or anything like that. So having something that is definitive and that you can count on with 100% certainty is something that is really impactful in a game like Call of Cthulhu, and I'm glad that they implemented this meta currency in this way. The next game in the classics is 7th Sea, a game that was the biggest Kickstarter for tabletop role-playing games way back in the day. It was kind of what set off role-playing games into the Kickstarter platform. So that's if you haven't heard of 7th Sea, it does have that claim to fame. 7th Sea, you earn fate points, and you get them by allowing the game master to add a compel or complication based on one of your character's aspects. So what do I mean by that? In 7th Sea, you have aspects, or they're like your abilities, right? So let's say one of your aspects is that you're good at gambling. In order to get a fate point, you can, say, approach a guard to try and get inside a hideout or something, right? And the optimal option here would be to maybe bribe the guard or knock out the guard or something like that. But your game master may say, hey, you're good at gambling. I'm going to give you a compel, and compel your character to make a bet with the guard and gamble. And if you win, they'll let you in. So this kind of puts you at a disadvantage, because the more impactful option would be to bribe them. That would be the more sure way to get in. But if you accept this compel, now you're going to get a fate point, which later on you can use to succeed or have a better narrative element or narrative success with that same aspect. So later on in the scenario, you may be at the gambling table in the hideout, and you need to win this bet in order to get an audience with the rogue leader. And now, because you took that compel and succeeded, now you can go ahead and win at this gambling table and be able to get your meeting with the gambit leader. So now this is a very different approach than the previous games that we talked about. This one is kind of more a shared narrative, which is a separate group, but I didn't include it in there because it is something that is more up to the player than the game master. So you'll understand what I mean when I talk about the other ones later. But basically, you work together with your game master to tell an interesting story. This, I think, helps a lot in terms of building a narrative for the adventure that you all feel great about and you all can work together with. The last game we're going to talk about in the classic section is Warhammer Fantasy. In this game, they also use fate points like in 7th Sea, but fate points work a lot different in Warhammer Fantasy. Basically, your race determines how many fate points you get. So dwarves may have more than humans. I can't remember which one gets more. But you get a higher die to roll or something like that when you're making your character. So the way fate points work in Warhammer Fantasy is they prevent a catastrophic failure of something. That's mostly what they're used for. And it's meant to tell stories that are compelling as far as heroism. So where a normal person would normally be taken out by a flurry of arrows, your hero may be able to run past those arrows and dodge them and avoid them. So if there's a flurry of arrows coming at you that normally would have killed you, you can actually expend a fate point to prevent that from happening and survive the situation. If your character falls off a cliff and that would have killed them, you may expend a fate point to survive. And it's sort of like saying fate is on your side and your hero still has more to do and they can continue going forward. So pretty interesting, and also plays really well with the narrative. It's more impactful in the sense that in those very crucial and critical times, it's when they benefit you, but less impactful in terms of the game they're not really used in the game as often until some event like that occurs. The second group that I'm going to be talking about is the shared narrative metacurrencies. So the games in this section are very heavy on narrative. The metacurrencies are far more impactful in a way, potentially changing how an entire storyline develops. Most of the time, these currencies are used by getting together with the game master and working together, sort of like how 7C is with their fate points, and then both the game master and player agree to the impact of the points that you use. So I'm grouping them into a group called shared narrative because it is something that you work together with the game master, as opposed to the previous group where the player makes that final decision. I'm going to do this. This is what, we're going to expend it on. The first game that we're going to talk about in this group is Fate Core and Spire. So this one also has fate points. A lot of games use the term fate points, but they all work different in each game. So fate points in Fate Core are a major part of the game. In other words, whereas in other games, these metacurrencies kind of, you can take them or leave them for the most part, in Fate Core, the game will not function without the fate points. So you earn them by playing to your character's aspects. You can then use them to influence the result of a narrative element in a scene, or you can also re-roll dice with it. You can mitigate the effects of a roll, so a roll against you, let's say. Or you can reduce or outright remove a negative consequence from something that happened within a scenario. As you can see, it's very free-flowing and very open in terms of an interpretation of how you can use these fate points. Now, unlike the metacurrencies in the previous group, the fate points for Fate Core and Spire can truly impact the way a story develops within a game, more so than any of the other ones within the previous group. The next game that we're going to talk about in this group is Blades in the Dark, a very popular game. It's not really a currency in this game. Characters can basically take stress in order to trigger a flashback. So stress is a resource, kind of like health in other games. So like where you may have hit points in Dungeons & Dragons, stress is something that depletes throughout a scenario or whatever in Blades in the Dark. You can deplete that resource. You can take stress in order to trigger a flashback. So how flashbacks work is you describe something that your character did off screen before the situation that you're currently in. So let's say you've infiltrated a hideout and a guard just happens to be walking by and sees that you maybe look a little suspicious and comes and confronts you. Now you're in major trouble. But what you can do is take a little stress, trigger a flashback, and tell the game master, well, my character, before we walked into this hideout, there was a guard who fell asleep at the bar, and I was able to steal their badge, and I have it with me. So you make the proper rolls, and then if you're successful, you suddenly have the badge with you. So it's kind of like magical. Oh, it just so happens I have this badge. Here you go. And now I can get by without any further suspicion from this guard. But if you didn't do the flashback, this guard confronting you, now you have to deal with them in the moment. So basically, the flashback is a really cool storytelling element. A lot of people that play Blades in the Dark swear by the flashback mechanic. It is one of the most popular mechanics in the game, and what really made this game famous and popular with a lot of people, because it really does play to that cinematic element that Blades in the Dark is kind of tailoring to, kind of like heist movies, Ocean's 11 or The Italian Job, that kind of stuff, where there's, especially Ocean's 11, there's always some kind of flashback. Or if you go to like White Collar, things like that, like shows like that, where a character's talking to another character and they cut to a flashback of something they did prior that is affecting their current situation. It is very clever the way that they've accomplished this mechanic, and I really like it. I've never played Blades in the Dark, but it seems like a very interesting game. The next group that we're going to talk about is the push-pull metacurrencies or mechanics. These games use metacurrencies that can potentially alter a future result in the game, but a lot of times when you use them, you're also granting the GM or fate a negative potential future impact on your character. So you're basically using something to benefit your character, but later on, because you did that, there's potentially something negative on the horizon that's now going to impact your character in a negative way. The first game we're going to talk about in this group is Conan 2D20 and Achtung Cthulhu. Basically, a lot of the Modiphius games use this Doom and Momentum meta currency. So you can get momentum by overachieving on a roll. So let's say you only needed a certain number to succeed, and you succeed by a much larger amount. Now you've gained some momentum because of that roll. You can bank them, and I think you can have up to 5. I'm not 100%. Someone in the comments will correct me on that. You can then use them to perform heroic feats and succeed on checks that are normally considered impossible. So like if Conan needs to lift a gate that no human could possibly lift, that's where these momentum points can be used. Now, on the same token, the game master can earn doom in the same way. So if one of their bad guys exceeds on a roll tremendously, now the game master has banked some doom, which they can use in a very similar way. Another way for players to earn momentum is if a game master uses doom against you. By using doom against you, the fates have now switched, and now you gain momentum that you can later use to help you on your side. One last way you can gain momentum in Modiphius games is by buying momentum. So what I mean by buying it is you immediately take some momentum, which in turn gives the game master some doom. So it's like, I'm going to take some momentum, but now the GM automatically gets doom, and then I'm going to take 5 of them. So you basically top off. And this is something that I think is a negative for the game, because it can potentially lead to a constant refilling of momentum and refilling doom to the game master, which creates a far more swingy gameplay loop than what I think the game was intended to have. I think I could be wrong, but my impression is that the designers wanted this game to have these momentum and doom kind of being used in impactful moments. But from my understanding, a lot of people tend to abuse this mechanic. Now, GMs can put a stop to it. You can set a house rule that you can't just buy momentum and doom in such a way, or only do it once per session or whatever. But still, as written, I believe you can do that as much as you want, which can create a kind of gameplay loop where you're always topped off on momentum and the game master is always topped off on doom. So rolls are going to be in extremes one way or the other, which is probably not good for the game. And not to mention, can certainly create a kind of us versus GM or GM versus the players mentality, which is what most tabletop role-playing games don't want. And the Modiphius games are definitely not meant to be kind of adversarial game master type games. There are games like that, but the Modiphius games are not, and this momentum and doom mechanic can create that adversity between players and game master. So something to definitely be careful with. The next game in this category is Daggerheart. So Daggerheart uses fear and hope dice. So basically their rolling system, their resolution system, is 2d12. One d12 is a hope die. The other d12 is a fear die. Sorry. Hope die and fear die. So whenever you attempt to roll, you roll both, and then whichever one rolls higher, that's what banks into like the pool, right? So if you succeed with fear, let's say, because your fear die rolled higher, basically the game master now has a fear point that they can later use against your character. If you succeeded with a hope die, then you've succeeded with hope, you gain hope for future use. And so you can use your hope and fear to alter the results of a roll. You can also gain additional benefits like empowering a spell. You can use hope die to boost a spell's power and that kind of stuff. Now, this can create some really compelling stories. It's a little bit different than the way Modiphius does, even though it's a very similar system. But unlike Conan's system, the accumulation of these points is extremely and completely random. So you can see where there might be some issues with that. Because it's so random, you can sometimes just have a streak of bad rolls where you give a bunch of fear to the game master, and now the game feels extremely unfair and like it's working against you. Or you can accumulate a ton of hope dice and kind of stroll through most of the scenario because you've got so many advantages going through it because you just got lucky on your rolls. And one more aspect about the fear and hope dice that it separates it and makes it completely different from most meta currencies that we're talking about today is it gives you the least amount of agency in terms of acquiring them. Even Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, where the Game Master has to give them to you for good role-playing, you at least have the option to say, hey, Game Master, that was pretty good role-playing, right? Don't you think I deserve inspiration? And then the Game Master might agree and give you inspiration. Or other players can jump in and say, hey, that was really good. Game Master, can you give them inspiration? that at least gives you a little bit of agency on how to receive them. With Daggerheart, you have the least amount of agency because it's completely random based on a die roll. You cannot ask the Game Master to give you one. You cannot buy them from the Game Master. You cannot expend or take some kind of drawback on your own. It just has to be completely based on whatever it is that you roll with the dice. The next game we're going to talk about in this category is the Marvel Heroic Role-Playing Game. It's a little bit of an older game. They use what's called the Doom Pool. So in Marvel, the players they build like dice pools based on their abilities. And the Game Master also accumulates what's called Doom dice in the Doom Pool. And they can use the dice in the Doom Pool to challenge the player characters and such, make life harder for them. This isn't random like Daggerheart, and it's also not as much like give and take or push and pull like Conan 2D20 and the Modiphius games. It's basically mostly something that works against the player characters, but the heroes generally start with their own dice pools, so this kind of is there to balance it out. I just wanted to talk about this one because it's still meta currency, because the Game Master can then just implement them to alter the fate of the heroes. It's not something that's a in-game mechanic, in-story game mechanic. It is a meta currency. It just happens to be one that works completely against the players. The last game that we're going to talk about in this category is Deadlands, and Deadlands uses what's called fate chips. So players can accumulate these. These are like basically poker chips, and it's very thematic because Deadlands, Western and all that stuff, right? So you get them through role-playing or completing objectives. If you draw bad hands when you draw cards. The Deadlands game uses a deck of playing cards, which also is very thematic. But if you draw a bad hand, you can also accumulate these chips. You also get them at the beginning of a session. So there's a pool of them, and then you can take them at the beginning of a session as players. And there are three different colors. There's red, blue, and white. And then for each one that you take, the Game Master also gets chips. Now, some are better than others. So like red might be the best one, then blue, then white, something like that. And then for each red that you take, each blue that you take, the Game Master gets a white chip. I believe that's how that works. If you take white chips, Game Master doesn't get any from taking those in the beginning of the session. So you can manipulate, and you actually have a little bit of agency as to how much you're going to give the Game Master, because it's based on the ones that you've taken in the beginning of the game. So this kind of creates a push-pull dynamic, kind of like the Modiphius games, but at the beginning of the session when you're pulling from the pool of chips, you can then decide, I'm going to take this much more and get greedy and give the Game Master some. So it's push-pull in that sense. Now, the difference is when the Game Master uses their chips, the players don't automatically get another chip to replace it or to counteract it. So Modiphius games, if the Doom is used against you, you get momentum automatically. In Deadlands, you do not. But separate from that, if a player uses a chip, the Game Master does gain a chip in return. So this is automatically stacked against the players in a way, so players have to be really careful with when they play and how they play their chips. And it's pretty cool. It actually creates a little bit more of a dynamic choice, and you have to actually think about what you're going to do when you're going to use these fate chips. So as usual, I'm going to talk about Left for the Vultures. Again, the game is still not quite out in terms of its alpha playtest, but it will be out very, very soon. But I kind of just want to tease you with a few of the mechanics that we're working on and our thought process for implementing the mechanics that we've implemented. So in Left for the Vultures, our meta currency is called Vengeance Dice. So every character starts with 3 Vengeance Dice. The game is centered around vengeance, stories of vengeance. Someone did something horrible to your character, or your character feels slighted by something or needs to enact vengeance because of whatever reason. And so therefore, when they start the game, they already have this building flame inside of them, that need for vengeance to enact revenge. So everyone starts with 3 d4s. Each vengeance die is a d4. So you start with 3 vengeance dice, and you can earn more as you level up. You also can earn more when you're defeated, or when you come to close to death. So if your character suffers a major injury or a major mental scar, you also gain vengeance dice and accumulate your maximum pool by basically, if you are left for the vultures or left for dead but survived, your character now has even more of a fire to enact revenge and vengeance against their enemies. So that's kind of where the narrative is playing into it. Now, the way vengeance dice work you expend them for pretty much anything in the game. You can, just like in one of those other games, I can't remember which one it was, where you can, I think 7C, where you can use it to end a condition. You can do that in Left 4 Dead Vultures. If you're being affected by any condition, your need for vengeance is so strong that you shake off that condition, whether if you're stunned, dazed, poisoned, or things like that. You just fight it off because of this fueling rage inside of you. You can also mitigate damage. You can deal extra damage because you're so angry and enraged and ready for vengeance that you can deal that lethal blow. Or you can also use it in order to absorb a hit. So you reduce damage from a blow. You can expend a vengeance die to remove a critical hit against you, so make it a regular hit. You can use it for many things in the game. You can also use them to gain extra movement during a turn. So if you need to reach someone, you get that extra push so that you can force yourself to run that much faster in order to achieve your goal. And last but not least, your vengeance dice are one of the few ways in the game that you can actually heal within a game session. So by expending a vengeance die, you can actually heal with whatever your roll result is. So it's very difficult to heal in Left 4 Dead Vultures, but it is kind of an indication of being able to fight on. If you heal your mental health, it is a way to clear your mind, because this is more important. The mission is more important. And I wanted to tie some kind of character improvement, because the game revolves so much about vengeance. I wanted to tie some kind of advancement or improvement for being defeated, in order to represent, hey, as you're suffering more losses, you're just growing stronger and stronger. I didn't want the full leveling of the game to be based on that, because players will game that and they'll kill each other, or purposefully get taken out by a character, by an enemy. So you don't advance through being defeated, but you do gain vengeance dice through being defeated. So it does create an element where players aren't necessarily going to want to be defeated, because you want to win in order to advance your levels. But also, if you happen to be defeated, you can at least get some kind of benefit because of it, and vengeance dice, assuming you're not outwardly killed. If you're outwardly killed, then you're dead, right? But one last use of vengeance dice is, which I think is really cool in Left 4 Dead Vultures, and this has worked really well in the playtest, is most games have this potential for a total party kill, especially games like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder 2. Once things start to derail, you hit this moment where the minute one character goes down and everyone's badly wounded, it kind of just spirals out of control, where everyone starts to go down one after the other, right? So this is very common in games like that. Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Tales of the Valiant, 13th Age. A lot of these games have a very similar effect of player characters dying, and TPKs, total party kills, are very possible in a situation like that. I wanted to prevent that in Left 4 Dead Vultures. So what I decided was, we can have it where if a battle is extremely difficult, clearly the player characters may have expended all of their vengeance dice against this enemy that's really tough, and one of their allies goes down. Now, if that ally dies, like completely dies, every other character regains all of their vengeance dice into the pool. We have found that this adds excitement. It basically makes a thematic sense where your characters see your friend go down and completely get killed, and now they're even more angry, and so they regain all their vengeance and fuel their fury. And they can use these vengeance dice to heal, to prevent damage, which completely prevents a total party kill from happening. It doesn't automatically win them the battle, but it certainly turns the tide at least a little bit more to their favor, where it's not a complete destruction or that downward spiral that occurs every time a player character goes down in other games. And I have found that it works fantastic. Feedback from playtesters has been, this is an awesome mechanic and a great way to finally end this death spiral that happens in so many games that no one has been able to figure out how to stop. So I think it's really cool. When you guys get a chance to play Left 4 Dead Vultures, let me know how it works out for you guys. So in summary, meta mechanics aren't just rules. They shape the way that we engage with games on a deeper level. They can alter the fate of certain characters, but they can also create some really dynamic elements and some great narrative for games and their stories that they are telling. So what's your favorite meta mechanic in tabletop role-playing games. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. If there's one that I didn't talk about today, post it in the comments. I'd love to read about it. This was a much longer video than I normally do, and I wanted to talk about a bunch of these games because they have some really interesting meta mechanics. And as you can tell from that last section about Left for the Vultures, I kind of took little bits and pieces from each one to make my own meta mechanic that I think ends up working out great for the game that I'm making. All right, guys, that does it all. My name is Vase Odin. I'm the lead designer of Left for the Vultures. Thank you guys for hanging out, and I'll talk to you guys real soon.